everyone. We teed this up really well. So you know, we were talking with Sip about like, you know, what the problem is and how they're thinking about the solution. And now I'm gonna go talk about the solution. I'm Ivan. I'm one of the co-founders of Generic, and actually Status is the first network that's gonna implement our protocol. So I'm gonna talk a bit more about how the protocol looks like and how it works. Turns out I have more time than I actually thought, so I don't know if I'll be able. Okay. God damn it. Okay. Okay. So I mean, we talked a bit about this, but you know, we have some cool graphs here of the problem that I just mentioned, which was like activity on a network usually dies after the airdrop. These networks expend a lot of resources to attract TVL. And yet, the actual beneficiary of that TVL are the issuers of stablecoins that sit in the background. And, you know, like Tether, by the way, the most profitable company per employee in the history of humanity. So they keep a lot of the benefit, while distribution partners, which are rollups, but also dApps, are the ones that actually carry the weight and the cost of like creating this distribution, creating demand. So what does that mean? This means that like networks and apps end up spending a lot of resources on incentives. It also means that you end up with like poor user experience and all around like generally disappointment in the market, because like most of the benefit from this system accrues to the so-called issuers. So, you know, why do we think that this is a problem that like it's finally time to solve this, right? Like it's not news. We've been through like several cycles. Yes, the past few years have been a bit exaggerated because of like the valuation of the rollups that are launching, and because sort of the game has become a lot more efficient of, okay, I'm gonna, you know, pump incentives into an ecosystem, I'm gonna grow TVL, hopefully somebody's gonna stick around afterwards. But there are other aspects of this dynamics that make us believe that like now we're in a good place to solve this whole like concentration of benefits to a few stakeholders that are otherwise largely external to the interaction, right? Like they're not building protocols on the rollups, they're not the rollups themselves, they're not the users of the networks, they're just like issuing a token, right? And you know, there are quite a few projects that have been working on, you know, bringing RWAs on chain, right? And at this point, like issuance is actually becoming commoditized. We're seeing this as like historically the issuers were keeping like all of the benefit for them. Now like some of that is starting to trickle down towards the distribution layer, which is dApps and rollups and DeFi mullets, etc. We believe that this process is going like way slower than it could be. So this is one of the trends that's going on. And then there is like another one, which is we have fragmented liquidity that is basically driven by the fact that being an issuer was a lucrative business. So everybody was like, okay, I'm going to issue my own asset and like I'm going to brand it and yada, yada, yada. So user fragmentation, issuance is a commodity. At the same time, on-chain native yield has become more scalable and credible and sustainable. So this means that there is an opportunity to democratize access to yield and liquidity without the complexity of relying on an issuer. So this is what we do, basically. So we allow any project or network to launch a native stablecoin and benefit from composable liquidity and the best on-chain yield, all without the need for an issuer. Right? There might be like an issuer on record for regulatory purposes, but there isn't a counterparty issuer. You don't depend on an entity somewhere holding T-bills on your behalf, and you don't have to share the economics with them. So how does that work? I'm gonna try to walk you through this relatively quickly. So basically, let's take the example of a network. Do I have a pointer here on this thing? Oh, amazing. Awesome. Okay, so if we take the example of a network, let's say status, right? So a user that is bridging to that network would just deposit USDC, USDS, USDT asset into a bridging contract, or what would they would consider a bridge. That asset on mainnet goes into yield opportunities with, we are starting to do this with Morphovaults and Stakehouse as the most secure and scaled curator. So assets start earning yield on the L1. Meanwhile, user just gets GUSD on the rollup, and they use that as the default dollar of a network. So they can do whatever they want. They can go LP, they can go provide liquidity on a money market, they can use it to play a game, buy NFTs, buy assets, punch shitcoins, use it to access leverage on a perp dex, etc. The point being, like, it's just the default representation of what a dollar is on that specific network. Meanwhile, the assets on the L1 are earning yield. We funnel that yield to the network, so it doesn't follow directly the user. So it's unlike, you can think of like staked Athena or staked USDS. Here, yield doesn't follow the user directly. It goes to the network, which, in the context of the previous conversation, this gives that network a lot more strategic flexibility of how they redistribute this yield to incentivize desirable behavior on chain, right? So for example, like, I don't want everyone who holds the asset on the network to just automatically receive the yield. I actually want people to potentially create very deep liquidity pools on a network native DEX so that I can create lending markets that have high caps because it's easy to like unwind positions and serve liquidations, for example. So because of that flexibility, this brings a lot more sovereignty to the network itself in how they grow and how they incentivize behavior. So why does this matter? Why does it make sense? And why we think it's better than a TBO wrapper? So, like, yield, it can be better. At the moment, the gap is not as drastic as we believe it can be, but the Fed is cutting rates, yields will be going down in the normie space, and usually that is associated with like a risk-on environment, which would push the yields on chain higher. So that gap is structurally positioned to grow. It also means that you have sovereign yield. So it's a simple user onboarding flow, but as a network, you also get like complete freedom of how, where, and when you incentivize. We provide you with a flexible implementation, which basically means that as a network, you can do whatever you want in terms of like branding. We can do compliance, so you can do your own. You can layer your own KYC or privacy functionality on top of that like generic asset. We thought about the name quite a bit. And then we're also building out an environment where you would be able to like express different risk preference so that different instances would have somewhat different risk reward profiles. The reason why like this is not trivial is that we actually don't want to lose the composable liquidity, right? Like the idea is this needs to be something that you can mint, redeem freely without a company in the middle, and that is composable across ecosystems and across dApps. When I said without a company in the middle, because there is no issuer, this means that there is no administrative overhead, but it also means that there is no economic conflict because there is no, like on the other side, it's the market. I don't need to strike an agreement with whoever is custodying my TBL. I'm just pulling liquidity from Aave, Morpho, potentially like other opportunities further down the line. But this also means that if the team behind generic disappears tomorrow, this thing will continue existing and serve mint and redeem requests by the by the users of the platform. And like ultimately some of us are here to build permissionless and unstoppable tech. And that's the principle with which we've been designing Generic. Feel free to reach out. Thank you.